Hey guys, Blitzy Talks here. So, owning a home is something most of us dream of, but given the current market conditions, it's made it, nearly impossible or at least extremely difficult to own a home. For me though, I was pretty lucky because I have a fiance to share expenses with. I have the financial discipline and the habits, to build an emergency fund for my own emergencies, as well as saving a separate fund for, home emergencies as well as home renovations, setting aside costs for closing costs and, any lawyer fees that I might have to pay. And of course, my partner and I plan to live in this home for at least 10, 15 years, if not even longer. My dream is to, partially retire, semi-retire early. And I would love to not have to pay a mortgage. I'd love to be able to own the home, get rid of that stress, have a, very big portfolio in terms of investments, and just kind of live off of that while having lower fixed expenses like no mortgage payment, just property tax, utilities, HOA fees, all of that good stuff. Here are a couple things that I don't think a lot of people talk about, but they should talk about, and things that I wish I knew sooner before buying a home. So cleaning is extremely labor intensive. Yeah, so this seems kind of obvious, but really I'll tell you kind of a bit of my experience. So when I first moved into the home, usually I do a weekly clean, and the first time I had to do it, I spent at least 5 or 6 hours just trying to figure out what cleaning supplies to use, what's the right thing to use, and just going through different multi-purpose cleaners or very specific types of cleaners, as well as finding out what is the difference between microfiber cloth versus like a kitchen towel rag versus like a disposable cloth, and seeing how each thing and each product affects the cleaning procedure a little bit differently. But on top of that too, I also had to figure out how to clean certain things. I didn't really understand how to clean toilets that well because I lived with my parents. They had done a lot of the cleaning, the chores, and I didn't really get much exposure to it. But it was definitely a bit of a learning curve for me. I was always afraid of making mistakes. For me, I think that's just part of the journey, and you should make mistakes when you own your first home, and you should try different things, and you'll learn as you go. But definitely these weekly cleans, they took a really long time, and I've kind of honed in on them now. I understand a good routine. I generally know how to do what I have to do. But at the start, it really took a lot of time and energy. It really made me unmotivated to clean and actually, you know, do it consistently every week. And on top of that too, every month we do a monthly clean. So it's like a deep clean basically. The first time I did it took about 9 hours, and that was insane, right? But really, it's something you should do. A lot of people don't always do it because they get tired, they get lazy. Life gets busy, especially when you're doing adult things, right? But you definitely should focus on cleaning your baseboards once a month, your fans, right, and on top of your hood fan, your oven racks, right, or your microwave, the little dish that spins in the microwave. For everyone it's different. For me, I like to keep things as new as possible, and it just kind of gives you that peace of mind knowing that I actually inspected it, I made sure it's clean, I made sure nothing's broken as well. So definitely set aside a lot of time for cleaning. Expect that's going to happen. It's going to be a part of your daily life. So for me, I was a very big saver. I saved about 80 to 90% of my income, on average usually. But ever since owning a home, I've dropped that down to about 45%. I'm kind of house hacking it right now, and we're kind of renting it out to someone we know. But despite all of that, I'm definitely took a big hit in terms of savings. And for me, as someone that's kind of built this habit over the years, it's made it really difficult to sort of accept, and hard to adjust, because as someone that is fairly frugal in a lot of ways, it's really hard to swallow that massive drop, nearly a 50% difference basically, right? And so for a lot of people, especially those out there who want to retire early, and they don't really want to go into that much debt, this could definitely be a hard pill to swallow. For me, I just kind of understood that as time goes on, my mortgage will go down. On top of that, I will be getting a promotion or several raises throughout my career, so I'm not overly worried. On top of that, again, I have someone to share expenses with, and of course we're house hacking, so sort of we're using this time, this short period of time we're house hacking and saving everything, just to sort of build up a good fund for emergencies, good fund for vacations, gifts, all these things, right? And while it is slower, it's something that I just kind of learned to accept over time. And I know that gradually it'll get back to where it might be, maybe not 80%, right? But it could be like 70%, 65%, right? So definitely something you have to accept, but it'll get better over time. The next thing I want to talk about is yard maintenance. So I hate yard maintenance. I'm just not good when it comes to planting. I'm not really good at keeping a good schedule when it comes to things, and my fiance kind of keeps me in check for that. But I really didn't understand how much work is involved. For example, something as simple as watering grass, especially when it's freshly laid out. You have to water so much. It takes so much time, especially when you have to work in the morning and you have to water multiple times a day, right? And don't even get me started on when it's like a heat wave. You have to water even more, and it's just so time consuming. And on top of that too, you don't understand how much gardening tools cost, right? A lawnmower, for instance, costs, if you want a decent one, like $300. It's insane. And even 400, right? Like it's absolutely crazy how expensive those are. On top of that too, you have to get other things like shovels. You have to get things like weed pullers or gardening gloves or a hose, right? Or a sprinkler. Like these costs are to add up. And I never really even considered yard work as as a thing at all. I thought I could just kind of leave it and just forget it. But once you have it in your home, it looks really nice, especially when it's freshly planted. But you want to keep things well maintained to some level. So definitely something to consider when you're getting a new home, especially as a new home buyer, right? Yard maintenance is going to take up time. It's going to take up money and resources. Do I think it's worth it? It depends on the person, but I personally am not the most fond of yard work. Some people love it. For me, I just absolutely didn't really enjoy it. I still don't enjoy it that much, but it's just something that has to be done. So security costs are something that some people kind of consider, some people don't. I know a lot of new home buyers or first-time home buyers don't really understand how important it is to have security. I live in a fairly safe neighborhood, but despite all that, I bought approximately $700 worth of security equipment. Do your research, find what works best for you. Personally, I don't like storing things on the cloud very much when it comes to home security. I prefer to store it locally somewhere, whether it be like an SD card or some kind of home base. Personally, I recommend Eufy. I've used them for a good, few months now, and I think they've been pretty good. They haven't really had any issues. They don't have to pay for a subscription or anything like that. Originally, I was offered a, professional security company to come install everything, but, the initial cost up front was about $2,000, and then every month after that, I had to pay $45. For me, some people might find that worth it. You could definitely, it's less of a hassle. I had to spend extra money to get like clamps for my siding, or had to buy some screwdrivers and a couple of other things, right? And learn how to set up the system, where to place it. It took a little bit of learning, a little bit of experimenting, but at the end of the day, I feel much more secure in my home. My partner and I both feel like that's something that we really, really want to prioritize. We haven't had anything happen, cross our fingers, but having a security system in place when I'm not at home or when it's late at night, right? It's really gives you that peace of mind, and it is definitely very costly, but I do think it's worth the cost. But again, most people don't really consider this when they're buying a home, but definitely something that you should keep in mind. So kind of on that topic before that I mentioned about house hacking. So specifically for me, we got our basement done. Luckily, as a part of a deal for the new home, but we are renting it out to a family member, I suppose, and his partner as well. It's only going to be for a short-term arrangement, about 3 to 5 years. But during that 3 to 5 years, it's saving us a lot of money. Their payments are helping us save an immense amount, about like $1,600, about $2,000, somewhere around there. So it's nice and it's really great and all, but the issue is that you are sharing a space with someone else other than the people you intended originally to share it with, right? And that comes with things like dealing with their habits, or dealing with, their lack of discipline when it comes to picking up after themselves and these kind of things. And, for me personally, I don't always like to take control of things, but it definitely feels good to kind of have my own space and kind of, when I want to get out, when I'm off work, I want to decompress. I come home, I don't want to feel judged. I don't want to feel like I have to pick up after anybody else other than my own kid, which that's another story for another day if I ever have one. But, it's something that a lot of people talk about. A lot of these financial gurus say, the house hack, and usually you can do this for like a duplex or something, but a duplex is like $1 million, right? Like it's a lot of debt, and it's a lot of leverage you have to undergo. But if you're just house hacking for your primary residence, it can be very, very good financially, but mentally it can take a different toll on you, and something to be very aware of. If you are going to go for a more expensive home and you're kind of offset the cost by house hacking, I highly recommend that you A, trust the person, and B, you kind of understand what their living habits are like. All these things definitely don't sound like a big deal, but even the best of friends, in my opinion, shouldn't and don't always make the best roommates. So definitely do your research prior before house hacking. Now I want to talk about furniture costs. So furniture is extremely expensive. A lot of us are kind of aware of it, but for those who have ever only ever lived with parents, right? It's very, very expensive. So kind of to put in perspective, our dining table, we got it for a pretty good deal. We got it for about 1,700, so that includes the chairs, it includes a bench, and it's not a foldable table, but it's like the ones that can extend out. But regular price, and that's most often, by the way, regular pricing is usually about, I think for that one is what, 2,500, give or take. And if you look at any other good pieces of furniture, not just IKEA, right, but actually like good furniture, it could run you anywhere, like definitely over 1,000, anywhere up to like 5K, 7K. It's easily, right, like couch that I got, we got two nice couches, and those were around, I think about 7 grand for two of them, a sectional and a regular just sofa. It was pretty expensive. It was mind-boggling how expensive some of these things were. And trust me, when you look at your home, I'm kind of a minimalist, to be honest with you, so I don't like having too much stuff, but I do want some things in my home, something that bring me value, some kind of comfort. And you'd be surprised how much these little things can add up. That's just furniture, right? There's so many other things you have to buy, but the furniture it's absolutely insane. Like, I think the first month I moved in, and luckily I set aside costs and I saved again before I moved in, but these costs ran me about $26,000 in the first 2 months. Of course, I had the funds to do it ahead of time, but really it just shows me how expensive home ownership is, and something that people don't consider, is furniture. Definitely, like, it's absolutely insane how these costs can really rack up. $500 here for an armchair, $1,000 here for a table. Like, these things don't sound like a lot individually, and sometimes they aren't, but really they add up when you put everything together. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is being stressed when you're away from your home, specifically when you're on vacation, right? So I haven't had to deal with this yet, but I do have a trip coming in December, and I'll be away from my home for a short little while, a couple of days, but it will be winter, and kind of where I live in Alberta, it gets very, very cold. So I get very nervous when I'm away. I'm afraid of things breaking, and I know a lot of homeowners usually, like, especially the first time ones, when they're away from their home, they're not really super aware of, exactly how to maintain everything. So, being around the home when things break right away is really nice. Things can't get broken super easily. But when you're away, it makes it really, really complicated, and also makes you really nervous too, right? You don't know what to expect, and you don't want to come home after enjoying like a 2-week vacation and suddenly you have this insane water damage all over your basement, right? So definitely, I'd recommend having someone check up on your home, whether it be a neighbor or whether it be like a family member. I'd recommend investing in things like water sensors, hopefully the ones you can connect with from your phone, investing in cameras that can watch inside your home, again, the security system, all these things that'll give you that peace of mind and let you kind of focus on enjoying your vacation. For me, again, that's kind of the things that I want to do, but right now, we'll see how it goes, and maybe I'll post another video on it, but I'm not really sure how I'll feel exactly once I go on vacation, but hopefully not as bad as I explicitly stated. So that's everything that I wish I knew before I bought a home at 25, but I know a lot of people aren't in the same position as me, but for those who are thinking of buying a home, I think this is something that you should definitely consider. All these points are something that most people don't really talk about, or maybe they do, but they don't really go into that much detail. If you guys enjoyed it, like, subscribe, comment, share, do all that good stuff. I've definitely been getting a little bit of traction here and there. Still no subscribers yet, but I hope that'll change sooner than later. But thanks for watching.